Nice. So I guess I'll start if that's okay with everyone. So hi everyone again. I'm going to talk to you today about Gutenberg. So introducing the WordPress Block Editor. So we're going to talk about let's get the focus on the right place. So just to sort of cover what we're going to talk about, we're going to go through what Gutenberg is, a bit of history and background about it. How did we get to here, where we are now with it? A little bit about page builders and what they are and what they're for. How Gutenberg fits in with all of that today, and some features and resources that you can use to learn more about it, to see, try and get some things answered that you might be struggling with. So we can go through those, and then there'll be time at the end for some questions. So firstly, you might be thinking, what is Gutenberg? Well, I'll also say maybe who is Gutenberg, because Gutenberg is he was a German inventor. So thinking all the way back to 1440, so like really way back in history, um, Johannes Gutenberg invented the mechanized printing press. So the printing press, uh, on the right hand side of this image, you can see a drawing a sort of an etch of a wooden printing press. So this was a machine that allowed pages of text to be quickly assembled using a pre-selection of letters and symbols, like you can see on the left hand side. So previously, lettering was all written by hand, and Gutenberg was this incredible inventor, and he was able to come up with a system that allowed it to be like sped up over time. So on the left, it's known as movable type, because they're little like sort of die casts of metal with letters imprinted on them, and they can be rearranged in any order. So then once the machine like rolls the ink over it, it can create content. So Gutenberg's major work was known as the Gutenberg Bible, and at the time it was the major printed text. The Traditionally the Bible was sort of only accessible to people through priests and through congregations. They weren't ever able to access it themselves and learn from it. And the Gutenberg impacted the mass spread of books, because it meant that anyone could create and own their own books to like look at things in detail. Um, it basically it's sort of a real big turning point in the world, and they said it sort of democratized publishing, because it wasn't just something that could be read or consumed by the elites, etc. So like bringing that into WordPress, WordPress's actual mission statement is to democratize publishing. So they kind of really like based around the goal of freedoms and publishing, and thinking about open source, so like sharing it. So they have ideas about freedoms, and there's like a sort of connection with Gutenberg in that sense. So it's about the freedom to create, change, and distribute. So with Gutenberg from a sort of software point of view, um, Gutenberg is simply the post editor in WordPress currently, as we're experiencing it. It's just a way of editing content within the background of WordPress. And it would completely change the way WordPress worked. And firstly, I'll just sort of just sort of scroll back a little bit in time here, like, the last sort of 8 years or so, and look at how WordPress used to look. So this is known as the classic editor, or at the time, it was just essentially the way that WordPress was. There wasn't a classic editor, it was the editor. So if you've been using WordPress for a long time, you might be really familiar with this look. So you had the main content area in the middle, and it was quite problematic, because you couldn't create layouts very well. So as you can see here, the content is stuck in the middle. Images cannot be positioned very well around the text. It's really fiddly and hard to use. And from like a professional sort of making themes point of view, it was very restrictive. all the content sits in a single section. If you wanted to have a layout, for example, where you split content sections, for example, you had the content and you had a gap with some other stuff, and then you had more content. The only way that you could really achieve that was through custom plugins and custom code development. And there's like a major plugin in the WordPress world called ACF, which is Advanced Custom Field. So it allows you to create these kind of really advanced layouts. So basically, at this point in time, this is where we enter page builders. So, excuse me. So page builders came in to kind of like to resolve some of these points. As you can see on the screen here, I've added as many page builders I can think of. So you've got like, these are probably the most common ones in WordPress that you've heard of. So like, they're installed as a plugin into WordPress, and they allow a completely different way of editing content, as we saw in the previous slide. So like, the main selling point of page builders is that it turns the WordPress editor into like a visual editor. So previously this way of editing was kind of visual in the sense that you could put the content there, publish it, and hope that it looked good on the other side. But now with these page builders, you could develop a pretty accurate representation of what it would look like from the sort of back end of the WordPress site. And like, that's a really enticing thing for people who've been used to the old way of doing things. So page builders had this real like strong drive, and people were sort of adopting it quite quickly. And then also page builders brought in hundreds of features into WordPress. So I've kind of like just thrown on the page. There's a lot of text on this page, but thrown in some things that page builders actually brought to WordPress. So like rows, for example, the ability to have those layouts that I mentioned with top to bottom, custom fonts, animations, gallery sliders, templates, that kind of thing. So like really feature rich. If you visit any of the websites of the page builders I mentioned, you can see how they actually do it and see some of the features that they do. So for non-technical people, this was like a real game changer, because suddenly you weren't limited by custom code. You could make any kind of layouts that were like really good, and the page builders themselves often like had a commercial side. So they had like a number of features that you could have for free, and then the commercial side you pay to get the extra stuff, so they can make it look as professional as you want. So like, where we are at this point in time is there's kind of like the way I like to see it is there's two ways of building custom themes or custom layouts in WordPress. So there's the page builder approach. It's basically unlimited. You could develop any kind of layout you want, and if you've had experience of using page builders, you know, obviously a big one is Elementor. So with Elementor, when you log into the WordPress and you're editing content, you literally just like drag and drop, and it looks very visual. So the kind of limitless approach means that it's very flexible. You could do anything you want in it. It's kind of beginner friendly because it's pretty self-explanatory and intuitive, and it would give you instant results. So like I said, everything you saw on the back, you can see on the front. And then the other side of things is like the non-flexible approach. So from for lots of design and development agencies, it's quite common that you would be working with a designer and you decide on a theme or a kind of branding overview, and you said this is how it's going to look. Page builders kind of threatened that, because they meant that if anyone could do what they wanted from a sort of client point of view, they could basically take something that's been crafted carefully by a designer and turn it into something that doesn't look anything like how they started. So on the flip side of page builders is the sort of non-flexible way. So that's like layout with guardrails, like I like to think of it. So it's intentionally constrained to be within a design framework. So for example, like I said, you have a design that can be neatly chopped into sections, like the header, the footer, all of the sections within. So I've got here on the screen ACF Flex Content. So like I mentioned before, ACF Advanced Custom Fields is a plugin that is free and paid for WordPress. And it lets you create like flexible sections of the website. And for years and years and years, like before page builders really sort of started to sort of come on the scene, ACF, this was the way of like building these flexible layouts for that sort of mimicked what page builders could do. The downside was it needs coding. There's training that's required around the client communications. So when I say client, I'm talking about if you're designing it for someone, but assuming you're building for yourself, that's a different kind of scenario. But you would say like, here are the constraints. This is the design for the header. This is the design for the gallery. You can move it up and down any way you want in a page, but generally speaking, this is the way it's going to look. So from a developer point of view, that was really good because you could still design something that was in keeping with the brand, but you can also constrain it as so that it couldn't be sort of messed up, if you know what I mean, like in the future. So after many years of working with WordPress and WordPress like having these page builders and having this old horrible classic editor, they needed to make a change. They needed to come up with a solution that helped address the way that editing was happening within WordPress, because these third-party page builders are not part of WordPress. They're separate companies, they're separate plugins. So WordPress needed to create a middle ground. So Gutenberg came about. This is a quote from one of the WordPress State of the Word videos. So Gutenberg is an effort to basically turn everything into blocks. So when we say blocks, we just mean discrete sections of a page. So like a header and then followed by an image. You almost have to think of it in terms of like layers or rows, as it were. So Gutenberg was brought about to behave exactly like how a page builder would do, but it would actually be native. It would be part of WordPress. WordPress was first introduced in version 4.7. We're on version 6.6.1, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we've come quite a long way, and every point version release is there are major releases, like major release version 5. That's when actually Gutenberg was rolled into the system. It was talked about in State of the Word. So Mariam mentioned at the beginning of this call about State of the Word. State of the Word is an annual conference that happens in the WordPress world. It's actually a physical conference, and it's in different cities each year. And Matt Mullenweg, who's the co-founder of WordPress, he gives a summary of everything that's been happening that year in WordPress. So they're all available on YouTube, they're all available on like WordPress TV. You can go back and like look at the history and see what's changed in that time. And the whole video is available on when they actually first introduced Gutenberg, so it's quite interesting. So when you go to the Gutenberg plugin homepage, Gutenberg originally was a plugin to WordPress. It wasn't part of WordPress because it was developed alongside, because they wanted to encourage people to test it and to get it out of beta and into like core as it is now. What you probably notice here is if you just look carefully, you can see the individual movable type that we talked about in the beginning of the presentation with the wood surround. So that's kind of like an interesting historical reason why they've got that there. And interestingly, quite sort of humorously, the very first time that they ever wrote any code for Gutenberg, if you go back to the original source of it, there's a website called GitHub where the code is stored, and the very first commit says prototyping since 1440. So they've got like a little cheeky reference to Gutenberg. Obviously, there's been thousands and thousands of commits since that first day, but that's like the kind of piece of history right there. Of course, when Gutenberg was like made part of WordPress core, it didn't have a great reaction, great response. So like here are some of the early reviews of WordPress. You just got one there that just says no. It's quite interesting, quite funny. I mean, this is going back 5 years. So this is the very first kind of reviews, and a lot of them are like this, which is it's kind of sad to see now because of the amount of work that went into getting it to this point. I mean, with any big change, there's going to be a lot of pushback, and it's easy to look at it now and go, oh, why are the reviews that bad? It's not that bad. But I think at the time it was such a big change in WordPress, and there was so many things that needed to be fixed or improved or like changed throughout the history of it, that it just had a really bad sort of a really bad reception. I have to admit that like when it first came out, I was thinking, well, I don't want to know about this. I'm happy with the way I do things. I don't want to learn something new. I like I like my ACF flexible content. That's great. And it was a bit daunting because it was like this big change, and everyone knew it. It was kind of like this feeling, okay, this is going to change. It's going to have a big impact on WordPress. Um, so you could say that Gutenberg is the biggest disruptor twice in a row now, because it happened the first time all those years ago. So like from where Gutenberg was in these reviews to where it is now, if I show you, so I just like tried to capture as many of the blocks that come with Gutenberg out of the box. So if you were to install WordPress today, these are all of the kind of features, these are all of the individual blocks that you get for free in WordPress. And like it's been 5 years since those reviews now. So Gutenberg has really matured to a place that has all the features that we mentioned when the page builders came along. You know, previously, way before Gutenberg was around, page builders unlocked the ability to have rows, like I mentioned, and things like padding and spacing and layout. That was all just foreign to WordPress at the time. But now, as we can see with Gutenberg, in this list here, you've got columns, you've got groups and buttons and rows. There's just so many features, and it's really exciting. I've been working WordPress for years now, probably about 14 years now, and I've had to like understand and engage with these changes. But I feel like in the last 2 years, like Gutenberg has really felt like it's matured, and I've been working with it now in a way that's like really exciting. When you go back to the classic editor, it's kind of like really difficult to use because of the many features. There's loads more blocks that are available. I couldn't put them all on the screen, but this is like just a few of them. So like looking back at the old classic editor, you kind of think, oh my God, it looks really, really old and clunky. And of course, this is a very old picture. So that's the old way of doing things. Now this is the new Gutenberg editor, and as you can see, like it's way more modern. There's loads of features and options, but it's very visually different to how we're used to using WordPress. You've got this like reactive sidebar on the right hand side, which changes depending on what block you're on, and then there's like different options that you can do for layouts and things. So at this point, I would like to kind of demonstrate just some of the cool features that I really like about Gutenberg. So in Gutenberg, when you're on a block, so on the left-hand side, the top left, you see it's just some text, hello Gutenberg, it's a paragraph. You can move blocks up and down with these little arrows, and it's just really easy to like click up and down and just watch it like actually move like in real time. So you can really see how the content's going to look. Groups are like a really interesting, useful part of it now. So you can group blocks together to create layouts. So for example, on the one that's selected, it's just like a full width block. So it might be useful if you wanted to create a section that just had like a really bold background color, which was full width, and then you had your content sitting nice and neatly in the middle. And you can now do things on the end. They only just introduced the one on the end, which is grids. So it allows you to do like sort of gallery layouts. That's literally just come about in the last, I think, few months. I've been playing with it. Also, one of the things that's really cool is you can like define a color palette. So you can say like, okay, my theme, themes like control the fonts and the colors and that sort of thing, and layout. You can say, okay, these are my themes, 1, 2, 3. I can only select those colors. So Gutenberg's now becoming like a really suitable middle ground. You don't have to worry that the client, oh, I keep saying the client, sorry, because I'm freelance, but you don't have to worry if you're trying to restrict it in some way that that you can select any color. Like, you do have the option to select absolutely any color and font, but it does allow you to restrict it down with like some simple config files that run in the theme. And then another thing that was like really cool, really powerful, was the ability to rename blocks. So on the left-hand side, you're seeing the list view. So actually on the left and the right-hand side, there's like an outline view that shows all of the blocks that are visible on the page. And when you've got like, say, 50 blocks or something, and that's quite easy to have, especially as even a paragraph is a block, so that it can quite easily build up. It was quite hard to determine what was what until you clicked on it and saw the blue outline. So renaming blocks is really useful. So as you can see there, I've renamed the blue heading block to blue heading block just to make it obvious, but that's a group and then it contains other blocks within it. And everything's much more fluid and dynamic. You can copy and paste from one page to another. So really useful feature if you're, say you've built a website and you've just been running it on your computer, or maybe it's on like a test website, and you've got some people to look at it and say, yeah, this is great, let's make it live. Previously, the process of migrating that from a sort of test site to a live site would be you having to like change all the URLs and make sure that all the images are in place. Nowadays, you could simply set up the live website and just copy and paste the content, and it will keep all of the content layout. It will keep the images in there. It will try and sort of match it like for like. So that's a really cool feature. And so, like, moving on to the next point with the features, is like thinking about how Gutenberg sits between page, like if Gutenberg has all these features, like what are the role of page builders today? So Gutenberg can sit alongside page builders, and you can have Gutenberg as like I mentioned, it's part of WordPress now. If you had Elementor or Divi or some Beaver builder or whatever installed on your WordPress site, you would essentially then have two kind of page builders sitting side by side. So it can get really confusing. I think some people I've come across in sort of the community have said to me, "Oh, I find WordPress really, really difficult. I really find it confusing. I hate using it, that sort of thing." And I've seen what they're doing, and they're kind of having to use these page builders that honestly, they're even for myself, who's been using WordPress for a long time, it's quite complicated, and I'm a bit lost. Whereas Gutenberg, there's been thousands of changes and improvements over the years that actually, once you start getting to know Gutenberg, it's not as confusing. And some of the page builders, like I mentioned, because of the features they have, they're so feature rich and every single thing is editable. It's sometimes a bit overwhelming to have that many options. And so like because of the way, like I said, Gutenberg has matured, it probably could be said that you could start to think about maybe moving, like to sort of start moving the content from the page builder layout back to like a native Gutenberg layout. And there are many ways you could do this. You could, like on the screen, you could install the classic editor. So the classic editor is a plugin for WordPress that it lets you turn off and on and actually decide which pages use the old editor and which pages use the modern Gutenberg editor. So it was introduced as a way to be able to control that if you're working on, say, an old website that is just not compatible with Gutenberg yet. For example, if you have a website that you've built 5 years ago or 8 years ago for someone, and you don't want it to sort of be stuck in time, you might want to upgrade it to the latest WordPress version, but you still want to turn off Gutenberg. So Classic Editor lets you do that. But it also lets you experiment. So say if you're on an old site like that, and you wanted to say, okay, only on certain pages I want Gutenberg Editor, you can just have that option. And so then it just gives you the chance to just play with it and see if you can do like swap outs like for like. There are a number of benefits to using Gutenberg nowadays over page builders in that, like, it's simplification, as I mentioned, with Gutenberg being very rich features, it is complex to use, and Gutenberg is somewhat it sometimes can be a bit confusing at first, but again, it's improving bit by bit, so it's becoming. There's lots of resources out there to learn it. Reducing cost. So with the page builders premium templates and blocks that you have to pay for to get the sort of extra features, you don't have to pay that anymore, because WordPress will hopefully get as close to that kind of layout as you were hoping. You're also going to have a faster website. You're not running lots of plugins at the same time. Elementor is, bringing all these features into WordPress, and it's just going to bog down your site. And that might be fine if you have really fast hosting, but if you don't have fast hosting and you've got maybe a sort of slow hosting package or something, and you're finding, okay, it takes 10 seconds to save each page, that's going to add up. And then sort of finally, like, I think things can just be simpler with Gutenberg, just through learning to use it. There's also, I'll mention, some really good resources out there. So recently, WordPress has put a lot of efforts and minds towards these resources. So there's a web page called Learn WordPress, and that's available on learn.wordpress.org. And on this web page, they've recently redesigned it. You can see, like, I've used the same fonts as they have, just to kind of showcase some of that. But the resource page here has like a number of courses, and they're all completely free. You can go through and tick off and say, I've learned this and I've learned that. So it's all part of just helping people to get better at learning WordPress. So there's like a developer side, as you can see on the left with the yellow graphics, or there's like a beginner one, and there's various intermediate courses in there. Really good resources. The other place is a website called WordPress TV. So WordPress TV is really amazing resource. It's essentially videos from conferences and meetups all over the world, and it's been going for years. And every time you go to, say, a conference or a WordPress, or even this meetup, probably will appear on here. So WordPress.tv, you go to the search, you just type Gutenberg, hit search, and you can find all the videos all about Gutenberg, people talking about it. So lots and lots of resources to learn it. And that, at this point in time, sort of concludes my presentation. So I'd like to say thanks for listening, and if you had any questions, I'd be very happy to take them.